Hey guys, tonight we're sneaking into a medieval bakery before sunrise. A place where secrets rise with the dough and the air is thick with the scent of flour, wood smoke, and maybe a little superstition. Picture this: you're crouched in the shadows, watching a baker stare intently at a lump of sticky dough, counting the bubbles as if his life depends on it. What on earth is he doing? Why would a grown man risk his reputation, his livelihood, and maybe even his next meal on something as simple as a few bubbles and bread? In a couple of minutes, you'll find out how medieval bakers tried to predict the weather using nothing but rising bread bubbles. By the end of this video, you'll understand why villagers would trust a baker's bubble count more than a priest's prayer or a town crier's shout. Here's a wild fact to get you started. Some bakers swore that a loaf with too many bubbles meant rain was coming, while a smooth, sleepy dough promised sunshine. But here's the twist: sometimes the bubbles lied. There are stories of bakers who bet the week's flour on their bubble forecasts, only to end up with soggy bread and even soggier reputations. Historians still argue whether these bubble rituals were clever science, pure luck, or just a way to keep nervous villagers entertained while their loaves baked. And honestly, if you're thinking, "I'd never trust my picnic plans to a loaf of bread," well, you probably wouldn't have survived medieval market day. Just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from, whether you're hiding from a thunderstorm or just craving a midnight snack. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside the bakery, the door creaking softly behind you, and instantly feel the warmth of the ovens against your face. The world outside is cold and damp, but in here, the air is alive with the crackle of fire and the gentle hiss of fermenting dough. You brush flour from your sleeve and glance around, taking in the rough-hewn tables, the battered wooden paddles, and the rows of loaves rising like sleepy giants under linen cloths. The baker, broad-shouldered, flour-dusted, and already sweating, nods a greeting without looking up. He's busy with something far more important than small talk. He's watching the dough. You inch closer, curiosity getting the better of you. The baker's eyes flick between the dough and the window, where the sky is still black and heavy with clouds. He mutters under his breath, counting the bubbles that pop and swell on the surface of the dough. You wonder if he's casting a spell or just trying to stay awake, but then he turns and grins. "If the bubbles rise fast," he whispers, "we'll have rain by noon. If they're slow, the sun will stay." You nod, pretending you understand, but your mind is racing. Is this real science, or just a baker's superstition? You notice a battered chalkboard propped against the wall, covered in tally marks and strange symbols. The baker explains that each mark stands for a loaf, a bubble, or a weather prediction gone right or wrong. Some days, the bakery is packed with villagers hoping for a sunny forecast. Other days, they come just to watch the baker argue with his dough. You can't help but smile at the thought. In a world without weather apps or radar maps, the fate of the village might just rest on a loaf of bread. As you watch, another baker enters, yawning and rubbing his eyes. He glances at the dough, then at the sky, and shakes his head. "Too many bubbles," he says. "Better fetch your cloak." The first baker laughs, but you can sense the tension beneath the jokes. If the bread bubbles get it wrong, There'll be more than just soggy shoes at stake. There's pride, reputation, and maybe even the week's profits on the line. You wander over to the work table, where a young apprentice is kneading dough with both hands, her face dusted with flour like war paint. She glances up and whispers, "My grandmother says if you see 3 bubbles pop in a row, you should close the shutters and bring in the chickens." You raise an eyebrow, but she's dead serious. In this bakery, weather and bread are tangled together like 2 strands of a braided loaf. The oven master, a grizzled man with a beard like burnt crust, is tending the fire. He claims he can smell a storm coming before the first raindrop falls, just by sniffing the rising dough. "It's the yeast," he insists. "They know what's coming before we do." You try not to laugh, but there's something about the way everyone listens to him that makes you wonder if he's onto something. Maybe in a world where the sky can turn from blue to black in minutes, you take your wisdom wherever you can get it, even from a bubbling lump of bread. A little bell above the door jingles as the village midwife enters, shaking off her cloak and demanding a forecast before she heads home. The bakers gather around the dough, peering at the bubbles and debating whether the wind will shift. You realize this isn't just about bread or weather, it's about community, about the rituals that bind people together in the face of uncertainty. The bakery is a place of warmth and comfort, but also of quiet drama, where every loaf tells a story and every bubble might be a sign. Historians still argue whether medieval bakers were really forecasting the weather or just reading patterns into the chaos of yeast and flour. Some say the bubble counting was a clever way to bond the community, giving everyone something to talk about while the bread baked. Others believe there was a grain of truth in the ritual, a subtle understanding of how humidity, temperature, and time could change the way a loaf rose. Whatever the answer, you're about to find out just how high the stakes could rise in a medieval bakehouse. The dough bubbles again, a tiny pop echoing in the warm, floury air. The baker nods, satisfied, and you realize you're not just watching bread rise, you're watching a centuries-old mystery unfold, one bubble at a time. You edge closer to the work table, drawn in by the hypnotic rhythm of hands kneading dough and the soft, irregular popping of bubbles breaking the surface. The apprentice beside you, elbows deep in sticky rye, glances up and grins. "You're watching for the bubbles too, aren't you?" she whispers, as if confessing a secret. Around you, the bakers move with practiced ease, but every so often, someone pauses, peers into a bowl, and counts under their breath. It's as if the dough itself is whispering predictions, and everyone in the room is desperate to hear what it has to say. One baker, his cap askew and his cheeks dusted with flour, claims that the bubbles know more than the town priest. "See here?" he points, showing you a cluster of tiny, frantic bubbles near the edge of the dough. "That means a storm by sunset. My mother swore by it, and her mother before her." You try to keep a straight face, but the seriousness in his eyes makes you hesitate. In a world where the weather can ruin crops, flood cellars, and turn a feast into a famine, maybe you'd count on anything that offered a hint of control, even if it was just a bit of yeast doing its thing. The dough bubbles pop and hiss, and the apprentice starts counting aloud. 1, 2, 3, that's a drizzle, not a downpour, she says, her voice low and confident. You realize there's a whole language here, a secret code passed down through generations. Some bakers count the bubbles, others watch how fast they rise, and a few even claim they can smell the difference between sunny, and stormy days just by sniffing the dough. It's a blend of science, superstition, and pure wishful thinking, like reading tea leaves, but more delicious. You hear a story from the oldest baker in the room, a woman with hands as strong as tree roots and a laugh that rattles the pans. She remembers a year when the bubbles predicted rain for a week straight, and the whole village panicked. People rushed to harvest their onions and patch their roofs, only for the sun to shine every day. The only thing that got soaked was my pride, she cackles, shaking her head. But the next year, the bubbles were right, and we were the only ones with dry bread for miles. The room bursts into laughter, and you can't help but join in. Historians still argue whether these predictions were just lucky guesses or if bakers really understood how dough responded to the world outside. There's a quirky tradition here. If a baker miscounts the bubbles and gets the weather wrong, they have to sweep the bakery floor for a week. Or, worse, bake a dozen loaves for the village dogs. You spot a young apprentice sneaking an extra glance at the dough, clearly hoping not to end up on dog duty. The stakes feel higher than you'd expect for something so simple, but in a medieval village, every little edge counts. If you can predict the weather, even by accident, you're halfway to being a hero, or at least the most popular person at the market. The ritual of bubble counting draws people together in unexpected ways. The midwife, the blacksmith, even the miller's shy daughter all stop by to check the forecast. It's a moment of shared hope and nervous laughter, a way to make sense of a world that's unpredictable and sometimes downright cruel. You find yourself rooting for the bubbles, hoping they'll bring good news, even as you wonder if any of this is more than just a beautiful, flour-dusted superstition. The apprentice nudges you. "Want to try?" she asks, handing you a lump of dough. You poke it, watching a bubble form and burst, and suddenly you're part of the ritual. You count 1, 2, 3, 4, and everyone leans in, waiting for your verdict. You hesitate, then declare, "A gentle breeze, and maybe a little sun." The room erupts in laughter and applause, and for a moment you feel like you've joined a secret society, one where bread and weather are forever linked. You notice that every baker seems to have their own style. One prefers to count only the bubbles that burst. Another insists on tracking how many appear in the first 10 minutes. A third claims the real secret is in the way the bubbles move. If they drift toward the edge, it's a sign of wind. If they cluster in the center, expect a calm day. It's a patchwork of traditions, each one fiercely defended and lovingly passed down. Sometimes, a visiting baker from another village will challenge the local bubble master to a friendly contest. Who can predict the weather more accurately, using nothing but dough and instinct? The prize is usually a loaf of the loser's best bread, and of course, bragging rights until the next market day. There's even a running joke among the bakers that the bubbles are more reliable than the town crier, who once famously predicted sunshine for a festival, only for the heavens to open and drench everyone, bread and all. "At least the bubbles don't shout at you," someone quips, and the bakery erupts in laughter again. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers were clever observers of the natural world or just creative storytellers, spinning meaning from the random dance of yeast and flour. Some point to the real science behind fermentation and humidity, while others insist it was all a clever way to keep the village entertained while the loaves rose. Either way, the bubble counting tradition endures, a quirky blend of hope, humor, and just a touch of magic. As the first rays of sunlight slip through the bakery window, you realize you're hooked. The next time you see a loaf of bread rising, you'll probably find yourself counting bubbles, wondering what secrets they might hold. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, you'll catch a glimpse of tomorrow's weather in the dance of dough. You slip out of the bakery for a breath of cool morning air, stepping into a world where the weather is more than just small talk, it's survival. The medieval village is waking up, and you can already hear the clatter of carts, the bleating of goats, and the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. But above it all, there's the constant, low hum of worry about the sky. You trudge past muddy puddles and half-frozen ruts, your boots sticking in places where last night's rain lingered, and you realize just how much the fortunes of this place depend on what the clouds decide to do. The villagers you pass are experts at reading signs, even if they don't always agree on what those signs mean. The shepherd squints at the horizon, looking for a certain shade of gray that promises drizzle. The miller sniffs the air, hoping for a dry day so he can grind his grain without the millstones clogging up. And the baker, well, you already know what the baker's watching. In a world without forecasts, radar, or even a reliable calendar, every job, every meal, every plan is at the mercy of the weather. You duck under the eaves of a thatched cottage as a sudden gust of wind whips a swirl of leaves down the lane. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke, and you can't help but shiver. It's easy to see why people here would turn to any method, no matter how strange, to get a hint of what tomorrow might bring. A single day of rain can ruin a week's worth of bread, wash out a market, or turn a wedding feast into a muddy mess. If you're a baker, you want every advantage you can get, even if it means counting bubbles and dough at dawn. There's a certain poetry to the way the villagers talk about the weather. The old woman mending nets by the river swears that if the frogs are loud at night, rain is sure to follow. The tanner claims he can predict a storm by the ache in his bad knee. And the children? They just hope for enough sun to dry their laundry, and enough rain to make the puddles deep enough for splashing. It's a constant negotiation with the sky, a dance of hope and resignation. You wander back toward the bakery, passing the market square where a few early risers are setting up stalls. The produce seller is already grumbling about the price of onions if the weather turns foul. The fishmonger, on the other hand, is delighted. Rain means more fish in the river, or so he says. You notice how everyone seems to have a stake in the forecast, and how quickly rumors spread. If the baker says rain is coming, you can bet half the village will show up with baskets, hoping to buy bread before the storm hits. There's a quirky tradition that if the baker's bubble prediction is especially dire, say, a week of rain or a sudden frost, the villagers will gather in the square to debate what to do. Some will rush to harvest their gardens, others will patch their roofs, and a few will just shrug and hope the bubbles are wrong this time. Historians still argue whether these community rituals were truly effective or just a way to share the burden of uncertainty. Either way, the bubble forecast becomes the talk of the town, a thread that ties everyone together. You stop by the blacksmith's forge, where the smith is heating his breakfast over the coals. He nods at you and asks, "What's the baker say today?" You tell him about the bubbles, and he grins. "Better bring my cloak, then. Last time those bubbles popped off, I got soaked." He laughs, but you can tell he's already planning his day around the baker's prediction. In a place where the weather can make or break your week, even the most skeptical villagers keep one eye on the sky, and the other on the rising bread. The baker's apprentice appears at the door, waving you back inside. The dough's ready, she calls, and the bubbles are talking. You follow her in, feeling the warmth of the oven on your face and the anticipation in the air. The bakers are gathered around the table, comparing notes, arguing over whether the bubbles are bigger than yesterday's, and debating what it all means. One insists that a cluster of bubbles means a thunderstorm, while another claims it's just a sign of good yeast. You realize that, for all their confidence, even the experts don't always agree. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers were just making educated guesses or if they truly understood the subtle ways that weather affects dough. Some point to the science, how humidity, temperature, and air pressure can change the way bread rises. Others argue that the rituals were mostly for show, a way to give people a sense of control in a world that often felt uncontrollable. Either way, the tradition endures, a blend of hope, habit, and a little bit of theater. As you leave the bakery once more, you glance up at the sky. The clouds are shifting, the wind is rising, and you can't help but wonder if the bubbles got it right this time. Maybe you'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. In this village, the weather is everyone's business, and the baker's bubbles are as good a forecast as any. You stroll down the muddy lane, the scent of fresh bread following you, and realize that for all our modern technology, there's something comforting about a world where the future is written in bubbles, not bites. Maybe, just maybe, we haven't changed as much as we think. You return to the bakery just as the first rays of sunlight begin to creep across the flour-dusted floor, painting golden stripes through the smoky air. The bakers are in full swing now, sleeves rolled up, hands flying from dough to oven and back again. You watch as one baker sprinkles a handful of yeast into a wooden bowl, the granules vanishing beneath a wave of warm water and flour. The mixture fizzes and comes alive, tiny bubbles racing to the surface as if eager to escape. The apprentice beside you winks. "That's the real magic," she says, "or so my uncle claims." As you lean in, you notice the subtle dance of science and superstition happening right before your eyes. The bakers might not use words like fermentation or carbon dioxide, but they know, by touch and smell and sight, when the dough is healthy and when it's doomed. One baker dips his finger into the mixture, lifts it to his nose, and nods in satisfaction. "Good yeast," he declares. "The bubbles are strong today." You realize that, without meaning to, these medieval bakers have become accidental scientists, testing, observing, tweaking their methods with every loaf. There's a joke among the apprentices that if you sneeze while mixing the dough, you'll end up with a loaf that rises twice as high, or, on unlucky days, collapses like a bad joke at the village feast. The older bakers roll their eyes, but you sense a hint of respect for the dough's unpredictable nature. After all, it's not just about mixing ingredients. It's about reading the room, the weather, and even your own mood. Some days, the dough seems to have a mind of its own, bubbling up with energy, or sulking in the corner like a stubborn cat. You watch as the bakers compare notes on the morning's batch. One insists that a sudden flurry of bubbles means a change in the wind, while another claims that slow, steady bubbling is a sign of clear skies. The debate grows lively, with each baker defending their theory like a knight guarding a castle. Historians still argue whether these observations were rooted in genuine understanding or just the human tendency to find patterns in chaos. Some researchers today point out that yeast activity really does respond to temperature and humidity, while others insist that medieval bubble counting was mostly wishful thinking served with a side of superstition. A quirky moment unfolds when a young apprentice, eager to impress, tries to whistle a tune to encourage the bubbles. The head baker smirks and says, "If that works, you'll be in charge of the weather next week." The whole room laughs, but the apprentice keeps whistling, just in case. You realize that, in this bakery, every superstition is given a chance. After all, you never know what might work when the weather and your bread are on the line. You lean over a bubbling bowl and notice how the dough's surface shimmers, reflecting the flicker of the oven's flames. There's a rhythm to it, the slow rise and fall, the sudden burst of bubbles, the way the dough seems to breathe. One baker explains that on especially humid days, the bubbles form faster and larger, while on cold mornings, they're slow and shy. He shrugs. The dough knows what the sky is planning, even if we don't. You wonder if there's a grain of truth in that, or if it's just the comforting logic of people who spend their lives at the mercy of the elements. A visiting merchant, in town for the market, pokes his head in and asks for a bubble reading before he sets up his stall. The bakers gather around, peering into the dough and offering their predictions. "Looks like rain by midday," one says. "Better cover your wares." The merchant nods, thanks them, and disappears, leaving the bakers to argue over whose forecast will come true. It's a scene that repeats itself every market day, a ritual as old as the village itself. You can't help but marvel at the way these bakers blend observation, tradition, and a dash of bravado. They may not have textbooks or thermometers, but their senses are finely tuned, honed by years of working with living dough. You realize that, in their own way, they're conducting experiments every day, adjusting recipes, testing theories, and learning from every success and failure. The line between science and magic blurs, and you find yourself rooting for the bubbles, hoping they'll deliver a perfect loaf and a perfect forecast. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers truly understood the science behind their craft, or if they were simply masters of intuition and luck. Some argue that the rituals and superstitions were a way to cope with the unpredictability of nature, while others believe there was real wisdom in the old methods. Either way, the tradition endures, a testament to the creativity and resilience of people who refuse to let uncertainty spoil their bread, or their spirits. As the first loaves come out of the oven, golden and crackling, the bakers cheer and slap each other on the back. You take a deep breath, savoring the scent of fresh bread and the thrill of a new day. The bubbles have spoken, the weather is anyone's guess, and the village is ready for whatever comes next. You return to the bakery just as the first rays of sunlight begin to creep across the flour-dusted floor, painting golden stripes through the smoky air. The bakers are in full swing now, sleeves rolled up, hands flying from dough to oven and back again. You watch as one baker sprinkles a handful of yeast into a wooden bowl, the granules vanishing beneath a wave of warm water and flour. The mixture fizzes and comes alive, tiny bubbles racing to the surface as if eager to escape. The apprentice beside you winks. "That's the real magic," she says, "or so my uncle claims." As you lean in, you notice the subtle dance of science and superstition happening right before your eyes. The bakers might not use words like fermentation or carbon dioxide, but they know, by touch and smell and sight, when the dough is healthy and when it's doomed. One baker dips his finger into the mixture, lifts it to his nose, and nods in satisfaction. "Good yeast," he declares. "The bubbles are strong today." You realize that, without meaning to, these medieval bakers have become accidental scientists, testing, observing, tweaking their methods with every loaf. There's a joke among the apprentices that if you sneeze while mixing the dough, you'll end up with a loaf that rises twice as high, or, on unlucky days, collapses like a bad joke at the village feast. The older bakers roll their eyes, but you sense a hint of respect for the dough's unpredictable nature. After all, it's not just about mixing ingredients, it's about reading the room, the weather, and even your own mood. Some days the dough seems to have a mind of its own, bubbling up with energy, or sulking in the corner like a stubborn cat. You watch as the bakers compare notes on the morning's batch. One insists that a sudden flurry of bubbles means a change in the wind, while another claims that slow, steady bubbling is a sign of clear skies. The debate grows lively, with each baker defending their theory like a knight guarding a castle. Historians still argue whether these observations were rooted in genuine understanding or just the human tendency to find patterns in chaos. Some researchers today point out that yeast activity really does respond to temperature and humidity, while others insist that medieval bubble counting was mostly wishful thinking served with a side of superstition. A quirky moment unfolds when a young apprentice, eager to impress, tries to whistle a tune to encourage the bubbles. The head baker smirks and says, "If that works, you'll be in charge of the weather next week." The whole room laughs, but the apprentice keeps whistling, just in case. You realize that, in this bakery, every superstition is given a chance. After all, you never know what might work when the weather and your bread are on the line. You lean over a bubbling bowl and notice how the dough's surface shimmers, reflecting the flicker of the oven's flames. There's a rhythm to it, the slow rise and fall, the sudden burst of bubbles, the way the dough seems to breathe. One baker explains that on especially humid days, the bubbles form faster and larger, while on cold mornings, they're slow and shy. He shrugs. "The dough knows what the sky is planning, even if we don't." You wonder if there's a grain of truth in that, or if it's just the comforting logic of people who spend their lives at the mercy of the elements. A visiting merchant, in town for the market, pokes his head in and asks for a bubble reading before he sets up his stall. The bakers gather around, peering into the dough and offering their predictions. "Looks like rain by midday," one says. "Better cover your wares." The merchant nods, thanks them, and disappears, leaving the bakers to argue over whose forecast will come true. It's a scene that repeats itself every market day, a ritual as old as the village itself. You can't help but marvel at the way these bakers blend observation, tradition, and a dash of bravado. They may not have textbooks or thermometers, but their senses are finely tuned, honed by years of working with living dough. You realize that, in their own way, they're conducting experiments every day, adjusting recipes, testing theories, and learning from every success and failure. The line between science and magic blurs, and you find yourself rooting for the bubbles, hoping they'll deliver a perfect loaf and a perfect forecast. Historians still debate whether medieval bakers truly understood the science behind their craft, or if they were simply masters of intuition and luck. Some argue that the rituals and superstitions were a way to cope with the unpredictability of nature, while others believe there was real wisdom in the old methods. Either way, the tradition endures, a testament to the creativity and resilience of people who refuse to let uncertainty spoil their bread or their spirits. As the first loaves come out of the oven, golden and crackling, the bakers cheer and slap each other on the back. You take a deep breath, savoring the scent of fresh bread and the thrill of a new day. The bubbles have spoken, the weather is anyone's guess, and the village is ready for whatever comes next. You linger just outside the bakery, the scent of baking bread clinging to your clothes, and listen as the town crier's bell echoes down the muddy lane. He's already begun his daily round, voice booming over the rooftops. Fair weather ahead! The Lord Steward says the sky will clear. Villagers poke their heads out of windows and doorways, some nodding, others rolling their eyes. You catch the baker's apprentice smirking as she wipes her hands on her apron. He's always late with the news, she whispers. We had our forecast before he even finished his breakfast. The rivalry between bakers and town criers is as old as the village itself. You watch as a small crowd gathers at the crossroads, torn between the crier's official proclamation and the bakery's chalkboard forecast. Some villagers hedge their bets, buying an extra loaf just in case the baker's bubbles are right and a storm rolls in. Others scoff, insisting the crier has the Lord's ear and must know best. It's a daily dance of trust, tradition, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Inside the bakery, the debate is in full swing. The head baker leans against the counter, arms crossed, as she listens to a group of regulars argue over whose predictions have proven more reliable. Last month, the crier said sun, and we got hail, grumbles the miller. But the baker called for rain, and I lost half my grain to the mud. The apprentice pipes up. At least when we get it wrong, you still get bread. The room erupts in laughter, and you can't help but join in. There's a quirky system for keeping score, a tally carved into the bakery's doorframe. Each notch represents a correct forecast. One side for the baker, one for the crier. You run your fingers over the grooves and notice the baker is slightly ahead, though the crier's tally is catching up this season. The villagers treat it like a sporting event, placing friendly wagers and cheering for their favorite weather oracle. The local children even play a game called Bubble or Bell, racing between the bakery and the square to see whose forecast comes true first. You wander out to the square, where the crier is holding court, surrounded by a handful of skeptics and loyalists. He waves his bell and declares, "The Lord Steward has consulted the almanac. Clear skies for the festival." A farmer shakes his head. "That almanac's as old as my boots. I'll trust the bubbles." The crier bristles, but you notice he glances toward the bakery, just to see if the dough agrees with his call. But today, the tension is higher than usual. The festival is coming, and everyone wants the perfect weather. The baker's forecast says rain by evening, while the crier promises sunshine all day. The townsfolk split into camps. Some rush to finish their preparations early, covering stalls with oilcloth and securing their wares, while others gamble on the crier's optimism, setting up tables and banners as if the sun is guaranteed. The village square becomes a stage for whispered bets and nervous glances at the sky. Back in the bakery, the apprentices are already planning tomorrow's forecast. They tease each other about who will get to make the official bubble count, and one even suggests slipping a frog into the dough for extra luck. The head baker shakes her head, but you see the corners of her mouth twitch. "If the frog starts bubbling, we'll have bigger problems than rain," she jokes, and the apprentices dissolve into giggles. There's a sense of camaraderie here, a feeling that even when the forecasts are wrong, the ritual itself is worth more than the outcome. The villagers gather in the bakery not just for bread, but for stories, arguments, and the comfort of shared uncertainty. The crier, for all his bluster, is a regular customer, and you catch him sneaking a glance at the chalkboard before making his rounds. "Just checking the competition," he says, but everyone knows he'll be back for a loaf and a laugh before the day is done. You realize that in this village, weather prediction isn't just about staying dry, it's about belonging. The bubble counters and bell ringers are two sides of the same coin, each offering a little hope, a little drama, and a lot of entertainment. Whether you trust the bubbles or the bell, you're part of the story, swept up in the daily ritual of guessing what the sky will do next. Historians still debate whether the rivalry between bakers and criers was a sign of healthy skepticism, or just another way to pass the time in a world without much certainty. Some say it fostered a spirit of innovation, pushing each side to refine their methods. Others claim it was pure theater, a way to distract from the unpredictability of medieval life. Either way, the tradition endures, and the village is richer for it. As the day wears on, you find yourself glancing at the sky, wondering whose forecast will win out. The clouds are gathering, the wind is shifting, and somewhere in the bakery, a fresh batch of dough is bubbling with possibilities. You smile, knowing that whether it rains or shines, the village will have a story to tell, and a loaf of bread to share. But as you step back inside for another slice, the head baker leans over and confides, "You know, sometimes I think the bubbles just like to keep us guessing. Maybe that's their real magic." The apprentices nod, and you realize that, in the end, it's not about being right or wrong. It's about the ritual, the laughter, and the sense that, if only for a moment, you can read the future in a bowl of dough. You slip back into the bakery, brushing a few raindrops from your cloak as the door swings shut behind you. The room is even warmer now, filled with the scent of baking rye and the low, steady hum of voices. The bubble count is over for the morning, but the bakers are far from finished. They're elbow-deep in dough, kneading, folding, and shaping loaves with a kind of reverence that feels almost like a ritual. You notice how their hands move in practiced patterns: press, turn, fold, press again, each motion as much a part of the day as sunrise or the tolling of the bell. As you join the circle around the main table, you realize that bread in this village is more than food. It's woven into every superstition, every blessing, every whispered hope for the days ahead. The bakers cross themselves before sliding loaves into the oven, muttering prayers for luck, good harvests, and a sky that won't turn sour by midday. Someone starts a chant, half song, half joke, about Saint Honoré, the patron of bakers, and the others join in, their voices rising above the crackle of the fire. One of the apprentices, cheeks flushed with heat and pride, shares a story about a loaf that supposedly saved the village from famine. "My grandmother says it was the bubbles that warned her. She counted 13, and that's how she knew to hide flour in the cellar before the storm." The others nod solemnly, and you sense that, in this place, stories are as important as recipes. Every baker has a tale about bread that turned the tide, a crust that stayed crisp through a flood, a rye loaf that kept its shape during a drought, a batch of rolls that rose even as the river did. You knead dough beside a boy not much older than 12, his hands surprisingly strong for their size. He tells you that if you shape the loaves just right, with a cross on top, it keeps away bad weather and jealous neighbors. And if you see a bubble pop right in the middle, he adds, that's a sign the saints are watching. You try your hand at the cross, but your dough looks more like a lopsided starfish. The boy grins. Don't worry, the saints have a sense of humor. There's a quirky tradition here. If a loaf comes out especially light and airy, the bakers hold it aloft and parade it around the bakery, singing a song that's part blessing, part roast. May your crust be golden and your roof not leak, they shout, and everyone laughs, even the head baker. On the other hand, if a loaf collapses or burns, it's given to the village dogs, who, you suspect, have developed a taste for weather bread. The bakers joke that the dogs are the real weather experts. If they refuse a loaf, you'd better bring in the laundry. You listen as the bakers swap tales of bread that brought luck or disaster. There's the legend of the midnight loaf, baked only once a year, said to keep away storms if eaten before sunrise. Some say it works, others call it nonsense, but everyone agrees it's the tastiest spread of the season. Historians still argue whether these rituals had any real effect or were just a way to bring the village together, but you can't deny the comfort they offer. In a world of uncertainty, a little superstition goes a long way. The head baker, wiping her hands on her apron, tells you about a time when a single, massive bubble rose in her dough just as thunder rumbled in the distance. I knew then we'd have a wet week, she says, so I doubled the batch and salted it heavy. Best decision I ever made. The apprentices nod in agreement, and you realize that, for all the jokes and jabs, there's a deep respect for the mysteries of bread and weather here, and understanding that sometimes you just have to trust your hands, your nose, and a few well-timed bubbles. As the loaves go into the oven, the bakers gather for a moment of quiet, each one touching the door for luck. You do the same, feeling the heat and the hope that tomorrow's weather will be kind. The fire crackles, the dough rises, and the stories linger in the air, as warm and comforting as the bread itself. But the rituals don't end there. You notice a small bowl of salt by the oven, and one of the older bakers tosses a pinch into the flames. For protection, he says, against bad luck and burnt crusts. The apprentices follow suit, each adding their own pinch, and soon the air is tinged with the scent of salt and smoke. There's a sense of shared purpose here, a belief that these small acts, crossing the dough, blessing the oven, counting the bubbles, are what keep the bakery running and the village fed. The conversation turns to other villages, and you hear tales of bakers who read the weather and the way the dough cracks, or who swear by the sound the crust makes when tapped. In the next town over, they hang their aprons outside, says one apprentice. If they're dry by noon, it'll be a good day. If not, they start baking flatbread instead. The bakers laugh, but you sense a respect for these neighboring traditions, a recognition that, in the end, everyone is just trying to get by, one loaf at a time. There's even a friendly rivalry between villages, with bakers sending loaves to each other as weather challenges. If your bread arrives light and fluffy, you win bragging rights for the season. If it's dense or soggy, you owe the other village a barrel of ale. The apprentices dream of the day they'll be chosen to deliver the challenge loaf, their eyes shining with anticipation. As the afternoon wears on, the bakery fills with the sound of slicing bread and clinking mugs. Villagers drift in, drawn by the promise of a fresh loaf and a story or two. The head baker carves thick slices from a still warm rye, handing them out with a wink and a weather prediction. "Eat this, and you'll stay dry all week." The villagers laugh, but you notice they all take a slice, just in case. Historians still debate whether these bread rituals were born out of necessity, faith, or just the need for a little fun in a hard world. Some say the blessings and chants made no difference at all. Others insist they're the reason the village survived so many storms. Either way, you're glad to be part of it, if only for a day. As dusk approaches, the bakers gather for one last ritual, the sharing of the lucky loaf. It's the first bread out of the oven, and tradition says it must be broken and shared among everyone present, bakers, apprentices, and even guests like you. The head baker tears off a piece and hands it to you, her eyes twinkling. "For luck," she says. You bite into the warm, fragrant bread and feel a sense of belonging you didn't expect. In this bakery, bread is more than sustenance. It's hope, history, and a daily reminder that, even when the sky is uncertain, there's always warmth to be found around the oven. The night settles over the village, but the bakery glows with light and laughter. You linger by the hearth, listening to the bakers trade stories and jokes, and realize that, for all the uncertainty in the world, there's comfort in these simple rituals. The bubbles may not always predict the weather, but they bring people together, and that's a kind of magic all its own. You step outside for a moment, letting the bakery's warmth fade from your skin as the crisp air settles in. The sky is heavy with clouds, and the village square is already buzzing with the kind of nervous energy that only comes when the weather is anyone's guess. You wander past the stalls, where merchants are setting out their wares beneath makeshift tarps, casting wary glances at the sky and, more importantly, at the bakery's chalkboard forecast. Today, the bubbles said rain, and you can feel the tension. Will the bread's prediction hold true, or will the crier's sunny promise win out? The market is a patchwork of hope and skepticism. The old woman selling onions has wrapped her baskets in oilcloth, muttering that she trusts the baker more than the Lord's steward. The fishmonger, on the other hand, is betting on clear skies, stacking his catch high and whistling a tune about sunshine for the herring. You notice a group of children splashing in a puddle, daring each other to guess when the first real downpour will hit. Even the dogs seem restless, sniffing the air with the same cautious curiosity as the humans. You make your way back to the bakery just as a commotion erupts inside. The door bangs open and the apprentice rushes in, face flushed, gasping. "It's happening again!" The bakers gather around the work table, eyes wide. The morning's bubble count had been unusually high, more than anyone could remember in months. The head baker, usually unflappable, looks genuinely concerned. "If the bubbles are right, we're in for a proper soaking," she says, voice low. The bakers spring into action, moving loaves from the rising bench to the oven with practiced urgency. There's a flurry of hands, flour flying, and a chorus of instructions. "Double the salt, it'll keep longer if it's damp. Make the crust thick, or it'll go soggy." The apprentices scramble to cover the proofing baskets with extra cloth, and the head baker begins marking the loaves with deeper crosses. "For luck, and to keep the rain away," she mutters. But even with all this preparation, you sense a current of anxiety running beneath the jokes and banter. The last time the bubbles predicted a storm this strong, the market was a disaster. Bread was ruined, shoes were soaked, and the bakers spent a week apologizing to angry villagers who blamed them for trusting the dough. You hear the story retold in whispers, how a single miscount led to a ruined festival, and how the unlucky apprentice who made the call had to bake for the dogs for a month. As the first fat drops begin to splatter against the bakery windows, the tension inside reaches a fever pitch. The villagers start pouring in, seeking shelter and, perhaps, a little reassurance. The bakery becomes a refuge, the ovens radiating comfort as the storm picks up outside. The bakers hand out slices of fresh bread, each piece accompanied by a joke or a gentle tease about the day's forecast. "At least if you get wet, you'll have a dry crust," one apprentice quips, and the crowd laughs, grateful for the warmth and the company. But not everyone is amused. The town crier bursts in, drenched and sputtering. "The steward's almanac said sun!" The bakers can't help but grin, and the villagers rib him mercilessly. "Next time, trust the bubbles!" someone shouts, and the bakery erupts in laughter. Even the crier, after a moment, joins in, accepting a steaming mug of cider and a thick slice of rye. The storm rages on, and soon the bakery is filled with stories of bubble predictions gone wrong and right. One woman recalls the time she ignored the baker's warning and lost her laundry to the mud. Another boasts that she always listens to the dough and has never been caught unprepared. The bakers listen, nodding, sometimes defending their craft, sometimes just enjoying the spectacle. "Historians still argue whether we're bakers or fortune-tellers," the head baker says with a wink. "But at least nobody goes hungry." As the rain drums against the roof, you notice a subtle shift in the mood. The anxiety fades, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The bakery becomes a haven, a place where the storm outside is just another excuse to linger over a second slice of bread and a third cup of cider. The apprentices, once frantic, now relax, sharing stories of their own bubble blunders and laughing at the memory of the great soggy loaf disaster of last spring. There's a quirky tradition that whenever a bubble prediction goes spectacularly wrong, the bakers must bake a special batch of humble loaves, small, dense, and marked with a crooked X. These are handed out to anyone who wants one, with a wink and a promise that next time, the bubbles will do better. Today, the apprentices are already shaping the first humble loaves, joking that they'll need a double batch if the rain doesn't let up. The storm finally begins to ease, and the villagers drift back into the square, baskets full and spirits restored. The bakers clean up, sweeping flour from the floor and tallying the day's bubble score on the chalkboard. The head baker sighs. "Well, the bubbles were right this time. But tomorrow? Who knows?" She catches your eye and adds, "That's the fun of it. No 2 days, no 2 loaves are ever the same." Historians still debate whether these bubble forecasts were ever truly reliable, or if they simply gave people a sense of agency in a world ruled by chance. Some say the rituals were a clever way to cope with uncertainty, while others argue they were just another form of village entertainment. Either way, you realize the tradition endures, not because it's perfect, but because it brings people together, rain or shine. As the last villagers leave and the bakery quiets, you find yourself lingering by the oven, savoring the warmth and the memory of laughter echoing off the stone walls. The storm may have passed, but the story of the bubbles, and the people who trust them, will linger long after the loaves have cooled. You stay behind as the bakery empties out, the storm now a memory, and the streets outside glistening with puddles that reflect the lantern light. The bakers are winding down, but inside, the real work of interpreting the day's events has just begun. You notice the head baker and her apprentices gathered around the cooling loaves, exchanging glances and quietly discussing what went right, and what went hilariously wrong. There's a sense of relief in the air, but also a hunger for understanding. The village may have survived another storm, but the quest to read the signs in bread and sky is never truly finished. You find yourself drawn to the back of the bakery, where a small, sub-blackened oven sits apart from the others. It's here you learn that the most experimental loaves are baked, the ones that test new theories about bubbles, crust, and the secret language of the oven. The oldest apprentice, a wiry girl with a quick smile and quicker hands, invites you to watch as she slides a test loaf inside. "This one's got double yeast and a pinch of wild thyme," she whispers. "If it cracks along the top, it means wind tomorrow. If it stays smooth, we'll have fog." She winks, as if daring you to doubt her. The oven itself is a character in this story. Its stones are pitted and worn, each scorch mark a memory of past experiments. The head baker runs her hand across the surface, explaining that the way the crust crackles, the smell of the first steam, even the sound of the loaf settling can all mean something, if you know how to listen. "Some say the oven talks to you," she says, "but you have to pay attention. Miss a whisper, and you'll miss the weather." There's a quirky belief among the bakers that the oven's mood changes with the weather. On dry days, it heats quickly and evenly. On damp ones, it sulks and burns the edges. The apprentices joke that the oven is as fickle as the sky, and some even leave tiny offerings, a sprig of rosemary, a crust of yesterday's bread, in the ashes, hoping to curry favor. You watch as one apprentice carefully sweeps the hearth, murmuring a rhyme about crisp crusts and clear mornings. Whether it's science or superstition, you can't help but be charmed by the ritual. The bakers gather around as the test loaf bakes, noses twitching as the aroma fills the room. They debate the meaning of every pop and sizzle, comparing notes from past storms and dry spells. The head baker recalls a summer when the oven's fire kept going out, and every loaf came out flat. "That was the year of the endless drizzle," she says, and the others nod, remembering how the whole village blamed the weather and the oven for a run of soggy bread. Historians still argue whether these observations were grounded in real science, or simply the result of centuries of wishful thinking. Some researchers point out that changes in humidity and air pressure do affect how dough rises and bakes, while others insist that the so-called language of the oven is mostly poetic license. Either way, the tradition persists, passed down from master to apprentice, a blend of careful observation and creative storytelling. You notice that each baker has their own way of reading the oven. One listens for a certain crackle as the crust forms. Another sniffs for a hint of caramelization just before the loaf is done. The head baker prefers to tap the bottom of each loaf, listening for a hollow sound that means it's baked through and, perhaps, that the weather will hold. The apprentices argue good-naturedly about whose method is best, but all agree that baking is as much art as science. Tonight, the oven seems to be in a generous mood. The test loaf emerges golden and perfectly cracked along the top. "Wind tomorrow!" the oldest apprentice crows, and the others cheer. They mark the result on a slate by the door, adding a note about the wild thyme and the double yeast. The head baker nods approvingly, then turns to you. You see? The oven never lies. Unless it's feeling mischievous. There's a tradition that after a particularly tricky bake, the bakers will gather around the oven and share stories of their greatest triumphs and disasters. Tonight is no exception. One apprentice tells of the time she accidentally used salt instead of sugar, and ended up with a loaf so hard it broke the baker's knife. Another recalls a night when the oven door jammed shut, trapping a batch of bread inside until morning. That was the best crust we ever had. She laughs, and the others agree. You're invited to join the circle, and as you do, you realize how much these rituals mean to the bakers. It's not just about predicting the weather or baking the perfect loaf, it's about connection, about learning from mistakes, and about finding joy in the unpredictable dance of flour, fire, and time. The oven, with all its quirks and secrets, is at the heart of it all. As the evening winds down, the bakers clean their tools and sweep the floor, humming a tune that sounds suspiciously like the bubble-counting chant from earlier. The head baker catches your eye and grins. Tomorrow, we'll try a new recipe. Maybe the oven will tell us something different. You nod, feeling a sense of anticipation for what the next day, and the next batch of bubbles, might bring. Historians still debate whether the secret language of the oven was ever truly understood, or if it was simply another way for bakers to make sense of a world that refused to be predictable. Some say the rituals and observations are a lost science, waiting to be rediscovered. Others believe they're just stories, passed down to make the work a little lighter and the days a little brighter. Whatever the truth, you know one thing for certain. In this bakery, every loaf is a message, every bubble a sign, and every crackle a promise of tomorrow's weather. You step outside into the cool night, the last rays of lantern light spilling onto the cobblestones. The village is quiet, the storm long gone, but the memory of the oven's song and the baker's laughter lingers in the air. As you make your way home, you find yourself listening for the subtle signs, the scent of rain, the whisper of wind, and perhaps, the promise of another story rising in the dark. You wake to the sound of distant church bells and the gentle clatter of carts on cobblestones, the storm now a memory and the village washed clean by the night's rain. As you step outside, the air is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and, always, the faint promise of baking bread. Today, the market square is alive with energy, farmers unloading crates of vegetables, merchants calling out their wares, and bakers setting up baskets of still warm loaves. But you notice something different. There's a group of travelers at the edge of the square, their accents strange, their clothes stitched in patterns you've never seen. Curiosity gets the better of you, and you wander closer, listening as the newcomers barter with the bread sellers. One woman, her hair plaited with ribbons, asks the head baker about the bubble count. In our village, she says, we watch the cheese. If it sweats before noon, there will be rain by nightfall. The bakers laugh, delighted, and soon everyone is swapping stories about how their hometowns predict the weather. You realize that bubble counting isn't just a local quirk, it's part of a much bigger tapestry of medieval weather lore, stretching from France to Poland and beyond. You join a circle of bakers and travelers, each eager to share their own methods. A man from the Rhineland claims he can forecast storms by watching the way birds gather on the church roof. If the swallows fly low, keep your cloaks handy, he says, and the villagers nod, some skeptical, some secretly impressed. A woman from the Low Countries swears by the behavior of cows. If they lie down in the field before breakfast, expect rain before supper. The bakers listen, taking mental notes, and you sense a quiet competition brewing. Whose method is the most reliable, the most time-tested, the most fun to argue about over a mug of cider? There's a quirky moment when a Polish merchant produces a wedge of pale cheese and solemnly sets it on the bakery windowsill. "Watch," he says. "If it cracks, there will be frost tonight." The apprentices crowd around, eyes wide, and for the rest of the morning, the cheese becomes the unofficial weather oracle, drawing more attention than the bubble board or even the town crier's bell. By noon, the cheese is sweating, the bubbles are rising, and the debate is in full swing. You wander from group to group, marveling at the sheer variety of weather wisdom on display. Some villagers swear by the color of the sunrise, others by the way the wind rattles the shutters. In one corner, a French baker demonstrates how to read the cracks in a baguette, while in another, a Hungarian farmer insists that the best forecasts come from watching the way geese preen their feathers. The head baker, always ready with a joke, suggests combining all the methods. If the bubbles rise, the cheese sweats, and the cows lie down, stay in bed. Historians still argue whether these folk traditions were rooted in real observation or simply a way to make sense of a world full of surprises. Some point out that, while not always accurate, these methods encourage people to pay close attention to their surroundings, noticing patterns that might otherwise go unseen. Others believe that the rituals themselves were more important than the results, bringing communities together and giving everyone a role to play in the daily drama of weather watching. You notice that, for all the differences in technique, there's a shared sense of wonder, a belief that the world is full of signs, if only you know how to look. The bakers swapped recipes and stories with the travelers, laughing at the similarities and marveling at the differences. By midday, the market square is a riot of voices, each one adding a thread to the tapestry of medieval weather lore. There's a friendly contest to see whose method will prove right by sundown. Bets are placed, loaves of bread, wheels of cheese, even a pair of woolen socks, and everyone keeps a wary eye on the sky. The apprentices take turns checking the cheese, the bubble board, and the cows in the distant pasture, reporting their findings with the solemnity of court scribes. The head baker grins at you. "Whatever happens, at least we'll eat well tonight." As the afternoon wears on, the clouds begin to gather again. The travelers pack up their stalls, the villagers hurry to finish their shopping, and the bakers prepare for another round of frantic baking. The cheese has cracked, the bubbles are rising faster than usual, and the cows are nowhere to be seen. The debate reaches a fever pitch. Will it rain, or will the sun break through at the last moment? You retreat to the bakery, where the head baker is already shaping dough for the evening loaves. She invites you to help, and as you knead the soft, warm mass, you realize how much you've learned, not just about bread or bubbles, but about the ways people everywhere try to read the future in the world around them. The apprentices chatter about the day's contest, speculating about which method will win and what stories they'll tell tomorrow. Historians still debate whether these weather rituals were ever truly effective, or if they were simply a way to bring people together in a world full of uncertainty. Some argue that the real magic lies not in the accuracy of the forecasts, but in the bonds they create, the laughter, the stories, the shared sense of hope and anticipation. As dusk falls and the first drops of rain begin to patter against the bakery windows, the villagers gather once more, sharing bread, cheese, and the satisfaction of a day well spent. The contest is declared a draw. No one method proved perfect, but everyone agrees that the real victory was in the telling. You bite into a slice of still warm bread, savoring the taste and the company, and realize that, in the end, it doesn't matter whether you trust the bubbles, the cheese, or the cows. What matters is the ritual, the community, and the simple joy of facing the unknown together. You linger in the bakery's glow as the rain intensifies outside, the windows fogging with warmth and the scent of rising dough. The day's contest has left the whole village buzzing, but not everyone is convinced by the bubble counts and cheese cracks. You notice a small group gathered near the ovens, skeptics, doubters, and a few who seem downright suspicious of all this weather magic. They whisper and roll their eyes, casting glances at the apprentices as if daring them to prove that bubbles can truly predict the sky. One of the skeptics, a traveling merchant with a battered hat and a sharp tongue, leans in and says, "You really believe a loaf of bread can outsmart the heavens? I'll trust my own bones before I trust a baker's bubbles." The head baker, never one to shy from a challenge, grins and replies, "Suit yourself, but when your bones ache and the bread rises high, you'll know who to thank." The exchange draws laughter, but you can feel the tension, a tug-of-war between tradition and doubt, faith and reason. A local priest steps forward, his robes damp from the rain, and warns the crowd about relying too much on earthly signs. "The Lord sends weather as He wills," he intones, "and to seek answers in bread or cheese is to stray from the path." Some villagers nod solemnly, crossing themselves, while others smirk behind their hands. The bakers, for their part, simply keep kneading, their hands moving with practiced calm. You sense this isn't the first time the bubble ritual has been called into question, nor will it be the last. There's a quirky moment when one apprentice, eager to defend the bakery's honor, challenges the merchant to a forecast off. "You use your bones, I'll use my bubbles. Whoever's right gets the last honey bun." The crowd erupts in cheers, and even the priest can't suppress a smile. The merchant grumbles, but agrees, and soon the bakery is filled with wagers, jokes, and a sense of playful rivalry. But underneath the laughter, there's a deeper current. You hear whispers about a neighboring village where a baker was accused of witchcraft after a string of uncanny weather predictions. "She counted bubbles, and the rain came just as she said," someone murmurs. Next thing you know, the priest had her locked up. The story hangs in the air, a reminder that in a world hungry for certainty, those who claim to read the signs are sometimes seen as dangerous. Historians still argue whether bubble counting and similar rituals were tolerated as harmless fun or viewed with suspicion by church and state. Some records suggest that, in times of crisis, anyone with a knack for prediction could find themselves accused of meddling with dark forces. Others believe that most villages simply enjoyed the spectacle, letting the rituals persist as long as they brought comfort and didn't challenge authority too directly. You notice a young apprentice quietly watching the debate, her face thoughtful. Later, as you help her shape dough, she confides, "My mother says the bubbles are just yeast and air, but I think there's more to it. Maybe it's not magic, but it's not nonsense either. It's hope." She shrugs, dusting flour from her hands, and you realize that for many, The ritual is less about the weather and more about believing in something, anything, that makes the future feel a little less uncertain. The skeptics aren't the only challenge. As the evening wears on, a scholar from the nearby monastery arrives, his arms full of parchment and ink. He's been studying the effects of temperature and humidity on dough, and he's eager to share his findings. There's a pattern, he insists, showing charts covered in careful script. On damp days, the bubbles rise faster. On dry days, slower. It's not magic, it's science. The bakers listen, intrigued, and soon the bakery becomes a lively forum, with villagers weighing in on everything from yeast to theology. The head baker, ever the diplomat, finds a way to bridge the gap. Maybe the bubbles are just bubbles, she says, but they bring us together. And if a loaf of bread can spark a good debate, that's reason enough to keep counting. The crowd murmurs in agreement, and the tension eases. The merchant and the apprentice shake hands, agreeing to share the honey bun no matter who wins the forecast. There's a quirky tradition that whenever a debate like this gets especially heated, the bakers bake a batch of debate rolls, small, round buns with a twist of dough on top, meant to symbolize the many sides of every argument. Tonight the rolls are extra golden, and as they're passed around, you sense the mood shift from confrontation to camaraderie. Historians still debate whether these moments of skepticism and inquiry were the seeds of modern science, or simply another layer in the rich tapestry of village life. Some say the willingness to question, to test, to argue, was what set these communities apart. Others believe it was the rituals themselves, the laughter, the wagers, the shared bread, that made the difference. As night falls and the bakery quiets, you realize that the real magic isn't in the bubbles or the bones or even the cheese. It's in the way a village comes together, wrestling with doubt and faith, science and superstition, and always finding a reason to share one more loaf. You help sweep the floor, humming the bubble chant, and feel a sense of peace settle over the room. Tomorrow, the debate will begin again, but tonight, everyone is fed, and everyone belongs. You wake to the soft glow of dawn filtering through the bakery's shutters, the warmth of the ovens already filling the air with promise. Today, the village square is abuzz with anticipation, for it's the day of the great bubble debate, a tradition that's grown over the years into a spectacle as beloved as the bread itself. You slip on your cloak and step outside, greeted by the sight of villagers gathering in clusters, some carrying baskets of rolls, others clutching scraps of parchment with their own weather notes, scribbled in the margins. The bakery is a hive of activity. The apprentices are busy shaping dough, but their eyes keep darting to the door, eager for the first sign of the crowd. The head baker, ever the conductor of this flour-dusted orchestra, stands at the center table, overseeing the morning's preparations. "Today we defend our honor," she says with a wink. "Let's show them what bubble wisdom really means." The apprentices giggle, but you can sense their nerves. After all, the whole village will be watching. As the sun climbs higher, the square fills with people. The town crier is already warming up his voice, ready to proclaim the official forecast, while the merchant from yesterday polishes his boots, determined to win back his pride after losing the honey bun. Children dart between the stalls, chanting, "Bubbles or bones? Cheese or stones?" and daring each other to pick a side. Even the priest is present, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Soon the debate begins. The head baker steps forward, holding aloft a bowl of dough alive with bubbles. "We say rain before sunset," she declares, pointing to the frothy surface. The merchant counters with a confident, "My bones say clear skies." The town crier, not to be outdone, waves his almanac and shouts, "The steward's chart predicts a gentle breeze." The crowd erupts in laughter and applause, and wagers are placed, loaves, pies, even a prized wedge of cheese. There's a quirky moment as a group of clever children, not content to trust the adults, sneak off to conduct their own experiment. Armed with a lump of dough, a piece of cheese, and a handful of pebbles, they set up a mini weather station behind the bakery. "If the bubbles rise, the cheese sweats, and the pebbles are dry, we'll have sun," one declares. The others nod solemnly, and soon their findings are being relayed back to the main square, adding a layer of youthful mischief to the day's proceedings. Back in the bakery, the apprentices are busy fielding questions from curious villagers. Some want to know the secret to a perfect bubble count. Others are more interested in the best way to keep bread fresh during a storm. The head baker answers each question with patience, blending practical advice with a dash of humor. "If your loaf flattens in the rain, just call it flatbread and serve it with pride," she jokes, earning a round of laughter. Historians still argue whether these village debates were genuine attempts to understand the world or simply an excuse for a good party. Some suggest that the bubble wisdom passed down through generations was a form of early science, a way for ordinary people to make sense of the unpredictable. Others believe it was all about community, the laughter, the wagers, the shared sense of anticipation that made even a rainy day feel like an event. As the debate heats up, a few clever villagers try to game the system. One man claims to have counted bubbles in every loaf baked that morning, presenting a chart with impressive, if suspicious, precision. Another insists that his cheese forecast is more accurate, waving a wedge that's been sweating since sunrise. The crowd cheers and jeers, but the head baker only smiles, knowing that, in the end, the weather will do as it pleases. The apprentices, emboldened by the crowd, stage a mock bubble count-off on the bakery steps. Each takes a turn poking a bowl of dough, counting aloud as the bubbles rise. The village children join in, some serious, some giggling, and soon the air is filled with shouts of 7, 11, 15. The town crier tries to restore order, but the laughter is infectious, and even the priest can't help but smile. As the afternoon wears on, the first drops of rain begin to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming on the rooftops and sending villagers scurrying for cover. The head baker raises her bowl in triumph. "The bubbles win again," she crows, and the bakery erupts in cheers. The merchant, ever the good sport, presents the head baker with a honey bun, and the two share a laugh as the crowd applauds. Inside, the bakery becomes a refuge from the rain. Villagers crowd around the ovens, sharing stories, bread, and the satisfaction of a forecast fulfilled. The apprentices pass out slices of still warm rye, and the children, soaked but happy, declare that next time they'll try predicting snow. The town crier, drenched but undaunted, promises to study up before the next debate. Historians still debate whether bubble wisdom was ever truly scientific or simply a delightful tradition. Some say these debates planted the seeds of curiosity that would one day blossom into real meteorology. Others believe the true legacy is the sense of belonging, the laughter, and the memories forged in flour and rain. As night falls and the last loaves are pulled from the oven, you realize that, win or lose, the bubble counters have given the village something precious. A reason to gather, to wonder, and to celebrate the unpredictable beauty of life. You help sweep the floor, humming the day's chant, and know that tomorrow, the debate will start anew, as long as there are bubbles to count and stories to share. You wake the next morning to a bakery that feels different, quieter, softer, as if the whole village is holding its breath. The rain has passed, leaving the cobblestones shining and the air washed clean, but there's a sense that something is missing. As you wander into the kitchen, you notice the apprentices moving more slowly, their voices hushed. The head baker stands at the window, staring out at the empty square, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that's long gone cold. Word has spread that today is the last day for old Tomas, the village's legendary bubble counter. For decades he's been the first to arrive and the last to leave, his sharp eyes and gentle hands reading the dough with a wisdom no one else could match. His forecasts have become the stuff of local legend, stories of how he once predicted a hailstorm by the way a single bubble trembled, or how his lucky loaf saved the harvest by warning the farmers to bring in their grain a day early. Today, he's retiring, and the village feels the weight of the moment. You find Tomas in his usual spot by the oven, kneading dough with a slow, steady rhythm. The apprentices gather around him, eager for one last lesson. "It's not just about counting," he says, voice raspy but kind. "It's about listening. The dough will tell you what the sky won't." He shows them how to watch for the smallest signs, a bubble that forms at the edge, a tremor in the surface, the way the dough sighs when you press it. The apprentices try to mimic his touch, but their hands are clumsy, their eyes too quick to glance away. Tomas just smiles, patient as ever. There's a quirky tradition in the bakery for a baker's last day, the farewell loaf. Each apprentice shapes a piece of dough, adding a secret ingredient, honey, a pinch of cinnamon, a sprig of rosemary, something that reminds them of Tomas. The loaves are baked side by side, their scents mingling in the oven. When they're done, the head baker slices each one, and the apprentices take turns guessing which ingredient belongs to whom. Laughter fills the kitchen, and for a moment the sadness lifts. As the loaves cool, Tomas sits and tells stories. He remembers the year the river flooded, and the only bread that rose was the batch he'd blessed with a double bubble count. He recalls the time he misread the dough, and the whole village ended up soaked at the spring festival. But the bread was perfect, so no one complained. The apprentices hang on every word, and even the head baker wipes away a tear when Tomas thanks her for trusting him with the bakery's secrets. Historians still argue whether legendary bakers like Tomas were truly gifted or simply the beneficiaries of good luck and long memory. Some say their reputations grew with each retelling, the line between fact and folklore blurring until it no longer mattered. Others believe that every village had its own Tomas, a keeper of rituals, a guardian of hope, someone who made the uncertain world feel just a little more predictable. As the day wears on, villagers drift in to say their goodbyes. The blacksmith brings a loaf stamped with his family crest. The midwife offers a jar of honey. Even the town crier, usually so loud and brash, speaks softly as he thanks Tomas for more sunny days than I deserved. The bakery becomes a place of memory, each gift a token of gratitude for years of quiet service. There's a moment of gentle chaos as the apprentices try to count the bubbles in Tomas's final batch. They argue over the meaning of each rise and fall, laughing as they realize that, without Tomas, the ritual feels different, less certain, more hopeful. The head baker steps in, guiding their hands, reminding them that bubble wisdom is meant to be shared, not hoarded. "You'll find your own signs," she says. "Trust your senses, and the dough will trust you back." As dusk falls, the farewell loaves are broken and passed around, each bite a blend of old tradition and new beginnings. Tomas stands by the door, shaking hands, offering advice, and finally, slipping away into the evening with a loaf tucked under his arm. The apprentices watch him go, their faces a mix of pride and longing, knowing that tomorrow, the bubble count will be theirs to lead. Historians still debate whether the legend of the last bubble counter is fact or fable, but in this village, it hardly matters. What counts is the way Tomas's legacy lingers, in the rhythm of kneading hands, the laughter of apprentices, and the quiet confidence that, come rain or shine, the bread will rise and the village will endure. As the bakery settles into silence, you realize that every loaf is a story, every bubble a memory, and every baker, no matter how young or old, a keeper of the weather, the ritual, and the hope that tomorrow will be just a little bit brighter. The next morning, the bakery feels both familiar and new. The ovens are already roaring, the apprentices bustling, but there's a hush in the air, a sense of stepping into uncharted territory. Tomas's absence is felt in every corner, yet the dough still rises, the bubbles still form, and the ritual continues. You watch as the apprentices gather around the mixing table, each one determined to honor the old ways while daring to try something different. There's a nervous energy, but also excitement. Today, the bubble count belongs to them. The head baker calls everyone together. "Today, we try something new," she announces, holding up a curious object, a glass tube with a narrow stem, filled with colored water. "It's called a barometer. The merchant from the city brought it, said it can read the weather better than any loaf." The apprentices crowd around, fascinated and a little wary. The head baker sets the barometer beside the dough, and for the first time, the bubble count is joined by a rival from the world of science. The apprentices begin their morning ritual, poking and prodding the dough, counting bubbles with careful precision. One keeps sneaking glances at the barometer, watching the water rise and fall with every shift in air pressure. Another insists that the bubbles are still more reliable, recounting how last week's cluster predicted a downpour that the town crier and the priest both missed. The debate is lively, with each apprentice defending their method, but there's a sense of respect for the new tool, a recognition that the world is changing, and the bakery must change with it. Outside, the village is abuzz with rumors about the barometer. Some villagers are skeptical, muttering that no glass tube can replace the wisdom of bread. Others are curious, peeking through the bakery windows to see this strange device in action. The blacksmith bets a loaf that the barometer will fail. The midwife puts her faith in the bubbles. Even the town crier gets in on the act, announcing, "Today's forecast, bubbles versus barometer. Place your bets." There's a quirky moment when the apprentices decide to run a side-by-side test. They count the bubbles, read the barometer, and then check the sky. "Bubbles say rain by midday," one declares. "Barometer says falling pressure, rain likely," another reports. The head baker grins. "Looks like we're on the same page, at least for now." The villagers cheer, and wagers are exchanged. But everyone knows the real test will come when the forecasts disagree. Historians still argue whether the arrival of scientific instruments spelled the end of old traditions or simply gave them new life. Some say the barometer and its can replace superstition with certainty, ushering in an age of reason. Others believe that the rituals of bubble counting and bread baking endured, adapting to new knowledge and finding ways to coexist with science. In this village, at least, the two methods are treated as friendly rivals, each with its own place at the table. As the day unfolds, you watch the apprentices experiment with the dough, adjusting recipes and techniques in light of the barometer's readings. One tries adding more water on a low-pressure day. Another tweaks the rise time when the air is dry. The results are mixed. Some loaves are perfect, others less so, but the spirit of curiosity is unmistakable. The head baker encourages them to keep notes, to compare results, and to trust both their senses and the new tools at their disposal. The village soon becomes a hub of innovation. Farmers bring in their own weather gadgets, wind vanes, rain gauges, even a homemade thermometer fashioned from a hollow reed. The bakers welcome each invention, testing them alongside the bubbles and the barometer, eager to see what works and what doesn't. The market square is filled with laughter and good-natured arguments, as villagers debate the merits of tradition versus progress. There's a moment of pride when the apprentice's forecast matches the barometer's exactly, and the whole bakery erupts in cheers. But there are also setbacks, a day when the bubbles predict sun and the barometer says rain, and the sky delivers a little of both. The head baker shrugs. Sometimes the weather just likes to keep us guessing. The apprentices laugh, and you sense that, for all the advances, the heart of the ritual remains unchanged. Historians still debate whether the transition from bubble lore to barometers marked the end of an era or the beginning of something new. Some see it as a loss, a fading of magic and mystery. Others celebrate it as progress, a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of understanding. In the bakery, though, it feels like both, a blending of old and new, a dance between faith and reason, bubbles and glass. As evening falls, the apprentices gather for one last count. They line up the loaves, compare their notes, and check the barometer one more time. The head baker smiles, proud of their efforts. "Tomorrow we'll try again," she says. "And the day after that. As long as there's bread to bake and weather to watch, we'll keep learning." You leave the bakery with a sense of hope. The world is changing, but the spirit of the bubble counters lives on, in every experiment, every debate, every loaf that rises against the odds. The sky may be unpredictable, but in this village, the future is bright and full of possibility. The days grow longer, and the village settles into a new rhythm. Each morning, the bakery is alive with the sound of apprentices debating forecasts, the barometer gleaming beside the dough, and the old bubble boards still hanging proudly on the wall. You notice how seamlessly the rituals have blended, bubbles and barometers, chants and charts, laughter and learning. The bakery has become a living archive, every loaf a record of weather, tradition, and quiet innovation. As the sun rises, you join the apprentices for the first count of the day. The dough is soft and warm beneath your fingers, the bubbles rising in slow, deliberate clusters. The head baker oversees the process, her eyes sharp but kind. "Remember," she says, "the dough tells a story, but so does the sky. Trust both." The apprentices nod, some scribbling notes, others simply watching, absorbing the wisdom that comes from years of practice and a willingness to adapt. Outside, the village is bustling. Farmers consult both the bubble forecast and the barometer before heading to the fields. The market square is filled with friendly wagers. Will the bubbles or the barometer win today? Children run between the bakery and the weather pole, reporting the latest readings with the solemnity of royal messengers. Even the town crier has adapted, announcing both forecasts in his morning round, much to the amusement of the villagers. There's a quirky new tradition, the double forecast loaf. Each apprentice bakes a small bread, one side marked with a swirl for the bubbles, the other with a line for the barometer. The loaves are displayed in the window, and villagers vote on which side they trust more. At the end of the week, the winning side gets a special batch of honey buns, and the losing side must sweep the bakery floor, though, by now, everyone agrees it's just an excuse for more laughter and camaraderie. You notice how the bakery has become a gathering place for all sorts: skeptics, dreamers, scholars, and storytellers. On rainy days, the benches are packed with villagers swapping tales of bubble predictions gone wrong and barometer readings that saved the harvest. On sunny days, the apprentices experiment with new recipes, inspired by the ever-changing weather and the endless curiosity that fills the room. One afternoon, the head baker invites you to help with the memory loaf, a special bread baked at the end of each season, filled with the flavors and stories of the past months. Together you knead the dough, adding handfuls of seeds, dried fruit, and a pinch of salt. As the loaf rises, the apprentices gather around, each sharing a favorite memory: the day the bubbles and the barometer agreed, the time a forecast went hilariously wrong, the moment they realize that baking is as much about community as it is about bread. Historians still debate whether the old ways were truly lost or simply transformed. Some argue that the arrival of science marked the end of superstition. Others see it as a new chapter in the village's story, one where tradition and innovation walk hand in hand. In the bakery, it's clear that both have a place. The bubble board is never erased, the barometer never ignored. Each is a tool, a guide, a reminder that wisdom comes from many sources. As the season draws to a close, the village gathers for their bread blessing, a festival that celebrates not just the harvest, but the people who make it possible. The bakery is at the heart of the festivities, its windows glowing with candlelight, its tables laden with loaves of every shape and size. The head baker leads a toast, raising a slice of memory loaf and declaring, "To the bubbles, the barometers, and the hands that bring us together." You realize, as you look around at the smiling faces, that the true forecast is written not in bread or glass, but in the bonds that tie the village together. The rituals may change, the tools may evolve, but the spirit endures, a spirit of curiosity, resilience, and hope. As night falls, you linger in the bakery, savoring the last crumbs of memory loaf and the warmth of shared laughter. The apprentices sweep the floor, the head baker hums a familiar tune, and the bubble board catches the light, a silent witness to all that has passed. Tomorrow, the dough will rise again, the bubbles will dance, and the village will greet the day with open hands and open hearts. Let the warmth of the bakery linger as you settle in for the night. Imagine the gentle crackle of the oven, the soft rise and fall of dough, and the quiet hum of voices sharing stories in the glow of candlelight. The world outside grows still, the rain a distant memory, and you feel the comfort of community wrapping around you like a soft blanket. As your breath slows, picture the apprentices counting bubbles, the head baker smiling, and the village resting easy, knowing that whatever the weather brings, they'll face it together. The scent of fresh bread drifts through your dreams, sweet and reassuring, a promise that tomorrow will come with new hope and new stories. Let the last crumbs of memory loaf melt on your tongue, and let your thoughts drift like flour on the breeze. The bakery sleeps, the village sleeps, and you are safe, surrounded by the gentle magic of tradition, laughter, and the endless dance of bubbles rising in the dawn. Good night, and may your dreams be as light as air and as warm as bread fresh from the oven.